You have been told lies about love your entire life. Not intentional deceptions, perhaps, but myths so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that we mistake them for truth. The lie that love completes you. The lie that finding the right person will finally make you whole. The lie that your soulmate is out there searching for you, and once you find each other, everything will fall into place. These are not just romantic notions. They are spiritual distortions that keep you trapped in cycles of disappointment, chasing something that can never satisfy because you are seeking it in the wrong way. Carl Jung understood what most people never grasp. The person you are desperately searching for externally is actually a reflection of something you have not yet integrated internally. Every failed relationship, every heartbreak, every person who seemed perfect until they revealed themselves to be human, all of it is trying to teach you the same lesson. You cannot meet your soulmate until you meet your own soul. This is not poetic metaphor. This is psychological and spiritual law. The reason you keep attracting the wrong people is not bad luck or poor judgment. It is that you are operating from your wound rather than your wholeness. Every unhealed part of you sends out a frequency that attracts people who will recreate your original trauma. The father who abandoned you becomes the partner who cannot commit. The mother who criticized you becomes the partner who can never be satisfied. You think you are choosing differently each time, but you are unconsciously choosing the same pattern with different faces, because your psyche is trying to resolve what was never resolved. God, or the universe, or whatever you call the intelligence that governs synchronicity and soul connections, will not send you your sacred partner while you are still using relationships to avoid yourself. This is not punishment. This is protection. Because if you met that person now, before you had done your inner work, you would destroy what could have been holy. You would bring all your unprocessed trauma, all your unconscious patterns, all your desperate need for someone to heal what only you can heal. But here is what they do not tell you. The waiting is not passive. The period before you meet your person is the most active spiritual work you will ever do. God is not making you wait arbitrarily. He is using this time to dismantle everything false in you, every defense mechanism you built to survive, every belief about yourself that is not true, every way you learn to perform love instead of embodying it. This dismantling feels like death because parts of you are dying, the parts that were never really you to begin with. There is a specific sequence to how divine love unfolds, and most people miss it because they are too busy forcing outcomes or drowning in impatience. First comes the darkness, not as punishment, but as preparation. You must walk through your own shadow, face every part of yourself you have been running from, and learn that you are not destroyed by what you were so afraid to see. Then come the signs, not obvious declarations, but subtle synchronicities that your rational mind will want to dismiss. When you finally meet them, it will not feel how you expect it. There will be no lightning bolt, no certainty, no immediate recognition. Instead, there will be something quieter and far more significant. The secret that changes everything is this: your soulmate is not out there waiting to be found. They are being prepared just as you are being prepared. And when you are both ready, not a moment sooner, your paths will cross with a precision that cannot be explained by chance. The question is not whether they exist or where they are. The question is whether you are becoming someone capable of recognizing them when they appear. Everything you are going through right now, every disappointment and delay, is making you ready. Trust the timing, the silence before recognition. There exists a peculiar quiet that settles over your life just before everything changes. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of anticipation, like the moment before dawn, when darkness is deepest, yet somehow different from the night that preceded it. You have stopped searching, not because you have given up, but because you have finally understood that what you seek cannot be found through seeking. It can only be received. Jung spoke of the transcendent function, that mysterious capacity of the psyche to hold two opposing truths simultaneously without collapsing into one or the other. You are learning this now. You are complete, yet open to companionship. You are whole, yet aware that wholeness can expand. You are at peace alone, yet sensing that peace has another expression you have not yet experienced. This is not contradiction. This is readiness. The months before you meet your soulmate are often marked by a strange withdrawal from the social performance of seeking. You stop updating your profile. You stop analyzing why the last person did not work out. You stop asking your friends if they know anyone, not from bitterness or resignation, but from a deepening relationship with solitude that has become genuinely nourishing rather than something to be endured until partnership arrives. In this season, God is teaching you the frequency of your own soul. Like a musician learning to hear the perfect pitch of their instrument before joining an orchestra, you are discovering the sound of your authentic self when no one else is listening. The voice that emerges in morning prayer. The truth that surfaces during long walks. The clarity that comes when you stop filling silence with distraction. This frequency is what will allow you to recognize the matching frequency when it appears. Many people mistake this season for stagnation. Friends ask if you are still looking. Family members offer to set you up. Well-meaning voices suggest you are being too picky, too isolated, too content with being alone. But you are learning something they cannot see from outside, that the deepest preparation for love happens not in the marketplace of dating, but in the interior cathedral of your own becoming. There is a specific kind of work that can only be done in solitude, the integration of shadow elements that would remain hidden in the presence of another. The confrontation with patterns you have carried for decades but never examined because you were always moving from one relationship to the next. The development of a spiritual practice that is truly yours, not borrowed from a partner or maintained to impress someone, but authentic communion between you and the divine. Consider the story of a man who spent 3 years single after a devastating divorce. For the first year, he was actively trying to move on, dating frequently, seeking someone to prove he was still desirable. The second year, he grew tired and withdrew, believing something was wrong with him. But in the third year, something shifted. He stopped evaluating himself through the lens of relationship readiness and began simply living. He took up woodworking. He volunteered at a hospice. He sat with his aging father in ways he never had before. He learned to cook meals for one with the same care he would for guests. He was not avoiding love. He was building a life that did not require love to justify its existence. And in that building, he became someone capable of offering partnership rather than needing it. His friends could not articulate what had changed, but they felt it. There was a settledness to him now, a groundedness that made his presence calming rather than anxious. He had stopped leaking the desperate energy of someone looking for completion. This is the frequency God is cultivating in you during the silence before recognition. Not the frequency of neediness or performance, but of genuine self-possession. You are learning that your worth is not determined by whether someone chooses you. Your value is not contingent on being in a relationship. Your life is not on hold, waiting for partnership to begin it. You are already living. Fully. Presently. With purpose and meaning that exists independent of romantic validation. The silence also creates space for your attachment wounds to surface without the distraction of new romance. In relationship, these wounds often masquerade as preferences or compatibility issues, but in sustained solitude, they reveal themselves clearly. The anxiety that made you check your phone obsessively in past relationships appears now as general restlessness. The avoidance that made you withdraw when intimacy deepened appears now as difficulty committing to long-term plans, even with yourself. The disorganization that made previous relationships chaotic appears now in your living space, your schedule, your inner world. Without the blame or shame that comes from hurting or being hurt by another, you can examine these patterns with curiosity rather than judgment. You can trace them back to their origins. You can feel the fear beneath the behavior. You can practice new responses in small, safe ways before the stakes of partnership require them. This is holy work. This is the difference between entering your next relationship, hoping it will heal you, and entering it already engaged in your own healing. A woman shared that during her season of solitude, she discovered she had been using relationships to regulate her nervous system. When she felt anxious, she would reach out to whoever she was dating, needing their reassurance to calm down. When she felt sad, she would seek comfort from them rather than learning to comfort herself. When she felt uncertain, she would ask them what they thought she should do. She had outsourced her emotional regulation entirely. Alone, these patterns became impossible to ignore because there was no one to call. She had to sit with her anxiety until it passed. She had to hold her sadness until it shifted. She had to make decisions without external validation. It was excruciating at first, but slowly, she developed an internal capacity she had never built because she had always had someone else to lean on. She learned she could survive her own emotions. She learned she could trust her own judgment. She learned that being alone was not the emergency her nervous system insisted it was. When she eventually met her husband, the relationship felt entirely different from everything that came before. Not because he was better than previous partners, though he was well suited to her, but because she was different. She was not asking him to calm her anxiety. She was already calm. She was not asking him to make her decisions. She already knew what she wanted. She was not asking him to prove her worth. She already knew she was valuable. From that foundation, they could build something neither of them could have built from a place of need. This is what the silence before recognition accomplishes. It strips away the urgency that drives you to settle for connection that does not truly fit. It removes the fear that makes you cling to people who are not meant to stay. It dissolves the fantasy that someone else can complete the work only you can do. And in that stripping away, you become truly available for sacred partnership, not because you need it, but because you are ready for it. The silence also attunes you to more subtle forms of guidance. When your life is full of noise, constant social input, endless options, and perpetual distraction, you cannot hear the whisper of divine direction. But in sustained quiet, you begin to notice things you would have missed before. A dream that recurs with the same symbol. A phrase that appears in 3 different contexts in 1 week. An inexplicable pull toward a particular place or activity that seems to have nothing to do with finding love. These are the synchronicities that Jung described, meaningful coincidences that carry psychological and spiritual significance beyond their surface appearance. They are not magic. They are the language of the unconscious, communicating with consciousness, and through that communication, the voice of God, making himself known in ways that respect your autonomy while guiding your path. But you can only hear this language when you have created enough inner silence to listen. So if you are in this season now, do not despair. Do not believe the narrative that you are wasting time or missing opportunities. You are not behind schedule. You are exactly where you need to be, learning what you need to learn, becoming who you need to become. The silence is not empty. It is full of formation. And when the time is right, when you have built the capacity to recognize what God is sending, the silence will break. Not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of two frequencies finally finding each other in the vast noise of the world. The threshold of sacred encounter. The day you meet them will be unremarkable in every way except one. The weather will be ordinary. The location will be mundane. The circumstances will lack any obvious significance. You will not feel a prophetic certainty or hear angels singing. There will be no cinematic moment of eyes meeting across a crowded room with sudden understanding. Instead, there will be something quieter and somehow more profound. A stirring, a recognition that bypasses your conscious mind and registers somewhere deeper. Jung understood that the most significant encounters happen not at the level of ego, but at the level of self, that deeper center where your individual identity connects to something universal. Your ego may not immediately understand what is happening. It may even resist, offering logical reasons why this person is not right, why the timing is wrong, why you should keep looking. But yourself knows. And that knowing creates a magnetic pull you cannot entirely explain or dismiss. This is different from the intensity you have mistaken for love in the past. Previous attractions may have felt overwhelming, consuming, urgent. They activated your attachment wounds and trauma responses, flooding you with dopamine and adrenaline that your body interpreted as passion. You thought you were experiencing powerful love, but you were actually experiencing powerful triggering. Your nervous system was responding to familiar patterns of unavailability, unpredictability, or enmeshment that matched your early relational templates. But this encounter is different. The person before you does not trigger your wounds. They activate your potential. In their presence, you do not feel the desperate need to secure their affection or prove your worth. You feel curious. You feel interested. You feel surprisingly calm, as if some part of you has been expecting them. There is attraction, certainly, but it is accompanied by a sense of safety that allows you to be genuinely present rather than performing or protecting. This safety is the first sign that you are meeting someone at the level of soul rather than ego. Ego connections feel exciting, but destabilizing. Soul connections feel right in a way that is difficult to articulate. Your body relaxes, your breath deepens, your usual social anxiety or performance pressure diminishes. You find yourself saying things you do not normally reveal so early, not because you are trying to be vulnerable, but because their presence naturally calls forth your authenticity. Pay attention to what you notice about them first. Not their physical appearance, though you may register that, but something less tangible. The quality of their listening, the kindness in how they interact with others, a sense of substance beneath the surface that makes you want to know more. Jung called this recognizing the imago Dei, the image of God in another person. You are not seeing them clearly yet, but you are sensing something sacred in them that resonates with something sacred in you. In the initial conversation, you may experience moments of unusual synchronicity. You discover you were both in the same place at the same time years ago. You both experienced a similar loss or transition recently. You share an interest so specific that finding someone else who shares it feels statistically improbable. These are not just coincidences. They are markers, breadcrumbs left by the unconscious to help you recognize that this encounter is significant, that you should pay attention, that something is being offered here. But notice also what you do not feel. You do not feel the need to immediately secure their interest. You do not walk away anxiously analyzing every word you said, wondering if you said too much or too little. You do not construct elaborate fantasies about your future together, or catastrophize about all the ways it could go wrong. There is simply a quiet openness, a willingness to see what unfolds without forcing or controlling it. This equanimity is only possible because of the work you did in the silence. If you had met this person 2 years ago, you would have responded differently. You would have been performing the version of yourself you thought they wanted. You would have been scanning for signs of their approval or rejection. You would have been running the interaction through your familiar patterns of anxious pursuit or avoidant distance. But now, you have developed the capacity to simply be present without agenda, and that presence changes everything. A woman described her first meeting with her husband as surprisingly ordinary. They met at a friend's dinner party, seated next to each other by chance. The conversation was pleasant, but unremarkable. She found him interesting, but was not immediately smitten. What struck her only in retrospect was how easy it felt. She was not trying to be charming or impressive. She was not monitoring his reactions to determine if he liked her. She was simply herself, and he was simply himself, and something in that simplicity felt deeply right. It was only later, after she left the party, that the significance began to register. She realized she had not felt anxious once during their conversation, which was unusual for her in new social situations. She realized she had laughed genuinely, rather than the performed laugh she usually offered when trying to seem fun. She realized she had disagreed with him on one point, without worrying it would make him lose interest. She had been authentic without effort, and that authenticity felt like coming home. This is the threshold of sacred encounter. Not dramatic, but real. Not overwhelming, but grounding. Not about losing yourself in another, but finding yourself more fully in their presence. The meeting does not solve anything or complete anything. It simply opens a door. And whether you walk through that door depends on your willingness to trust what your soul recognizes, even when your mind cannot yet understand it. The threshold also requires discernment. Not everyone who feels safe is meant to stay. Not every pleasant encounter is a divine appointment. Your task in this moment is not to determine the entire future of the connection, but simply to remain open and curious, to exchange information if that feels right, to agree to meet again if you both want to let it unfold at its own pace without rushing ahead or holding back. God's timing in this threshold moment is exquisite. You are meeting them not when you desperately needed them, but when you are capable of truly seeing them. Not when you were empty and seeking someone to fill you, but when you are full and able to share that fullness. Not when you were performing a false self, but when you have developed enough security to show your real self. The threshold appears when you are ready to cross it, and not a moment before. There is also the possibility that you will not immediately recognize the significance. You may exchange pleasantries and part ways, only to find them returning to your thoughts in the following days. You may dismiss the encounter as random, yet feel compelled to reach out again. This is the unconscious doing its work, bringing to conscious awareness what was registered at a deeper level. Trust these returning thoughts. Trust the impulse to reconnect. Trust that if someone continues to surface in your awareness without effort or forcing, there may be something there worth exploring. The threshold is fragile. It can be crossed or it can be missed. Many people stand at this threshold multiple times in their lives, encountering someone who could have been significant, but they are not ready. They are still too defended. They are still looking for something that fits their fantasy rather than something that fits their soul. They are still operating from wound rather than wholeness. So they let the person pass without recognition, and the moment dissolves back into the ordinary flow of life. But you are different now. You have done the preparation. You have learned to recognize the frequency of your own soul. You have developed the capacity to be present rather than performing. You have released the desperate urgency that clouds perception. So when you stand at this threshold, you will have the clarity to recognize it, and the courage to step forward into whatever God is arranging, trusting that if this person has appeared in your path at this particular moment, it is not random. It is invitation, the crucible of integration. What follows the initial recognition is not the fairy tale ending. It is the beginning of the most challenging spiritual work two people can undertake together. Because once the surface pleasantness of early connection settles, once you move beyond the careful presentation of your best selves, the real material of transformation begins to emerge. Every unhealed wound, every unconscious pattern, every shadow element you thought you had transcended will surface in this relationship. Not because you have chosen wrongly, but because you have chosen rightly. Only the right person can access the deepest layers of your psyche. Jung described relationship as the most effective form of individuation because another person acts as a mirror, revealing what you cannot see in yourself. In solitude, you can maintain comfortable illusions about who you are. You can tell yourself you are patient when you have simply removed everyone who tests your patience. You can believe you are generous when you have never had to share your resources or space. You can think you are healed when you have just avoided situations that would reveal your wounds. But partnership strips away these illusions with relentless consistency. Your partner is not trying to expose your shadows. They are simply being themselves. And their way of being inevitably collides with yours in ways that reveal where you are still defended, still controlling, still operating from fear rather than love. The dishes left in the sink that trigger disproportionate frustration. The need for alone time that feels like rejection. The different approach to conflict that makes you want to flee. These are not incompatibilities. These are opportunities for integration. The crucible phase begins when you first feel disappointed by them, not in catastrophic ways, but in the small ways that reveal they are human rather than the ideal you unconsciously projected onto them. They forget something important to you. They respond dismissively when you are hurt. They choose something for themselves that you needed them to choose for you. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can decide, this proves they are wrong for you, or you can recognize this is the work. Most people choose the first option. They interpret disappointment as incompatibility. They believe that the right person should never frustrate them, never fail to meet their needs, never require them to confront their own immature expectations. So they leave, seeking someone who will maintain the fantasy a bit longer. And they repeat this pattern through multiple relationships, always arriving at the same crucible moment, always choosing to flee rather than transform. But if this is truly your soulmate, you will find you cannot leave so easily. Something deeper than satisfaction or convenience holds you. Not codependency or fear of being alone. You have already proven you can be alone. But a soul-level knowing that this person is part of your sacred curriculum, that what you need to learn requires their specific presence, that walking away would be avoiding the very growth you have been preparing for. So you stay, and in staying, you begin the painful work of withdrawing your projections. You start to see them as they actually are, rather than as you need them to be. You discover they have their own wounds that have nothing to do with you. You realize their way of being is not wrong, just different. You understand that their inability to meet certain needs is not rejection, but limitation, and that you too have limitations that disappoint them. This process is disorienting because it requires you to grieve. You grieve the fantasy partner who would have perfectly complemented you. You grieve the easy relationship that would have required no effort. You grieve the version of love you thought you wanted, where someone would finally heal all your childhood wounds by being everything your parents were not. You have to let all of that die to make space for what is actually being offered. Not perfect love, but real love. Not completion, but companionship in continued growth. A man described this phase as feeling like he was learning to love for the first time. In previous relationships, he had loved the feeling of being in love. He had loved the validation of being chosen. He had loved the distraction from his own emptiness. But with his wife, none of those external rewards were sufficient to sustain him through the hard moments. He had to access something deeper. He had to choose to love her even when she was not making him feel good. He had to commit to her growth even when it conflicted with his comfort. He had to show up even when he wanted to withdraw. This is agape love, sacred love, the love that most closely reflects how God loves us. It is not primarily a feeling, but a commitment. Not primarily attraction, but will. Not primarily receiving, but giving. And most people never access this level of love because they exit the relationship before the crucible does its work. They mistake the heat for destruction rather than refinement. The crucible also surfaces the attachment wounds you could not fully heal in solitude. The anxious attachment that makes you panic when they need space. The avoidant attachment that makes you distance when they need closeness. The disorganized attachment that makes you simultaneously crave and fear intimacy. These patterns are not ideas anymore. They are lived experiences happening in real time with real consequences. And your partner is experiencing their own attachment wounds in reaction to yours, creating a complex dance of mutual triggering. This is where the work becomes both partners' responsibility. You cannot heal unilaterally. You cannot change only yourself and expect the relationship to transform. Both people must be willing to look at their patterns, to take ownership of their reactions, to communicate vulnerably about what is happening beneath their defenses. This requires a level of emotional honesty that most people have never practiced. It requires saying things like, "I am terrified right now. I am feeling abandoned, even though I know you have done nothing wrong. I am shutting down because this feels too close. I need reassurance, not because you have been untrustworthy, but because my past has taught me not to trust." These statements are incredibly vulnerable because they reveal your wounds without blaming your partner for them. They distinguish between your internal experience and external reality. They take responsibility for your reactions while also making your needs known. Most people cannot do this. They either suppress their needs entirely or express them as accusations. But in sacred partnership, you learn a third way: honest vulnerability that invites repair rather than demands it. The crucible also requires you to develop distress tolerance. There will be moments when you are deeply uncomfortable, and the discomfort does not immediately resolve. Your partner is upset with you and needs time before they can talk. You have hurt them, and they are not ready to forgive yet. You have a need they cannot meet right now. You want reassurance, and they are too depleted to give it. In these moments, you must sit with the discomfort without acting out, without shutting down, without making it worse through desperate attempts to fix it quickly. This tolerance is what differentiates mature love from immature love. Immature love cannot hold tension. It needs immediate resolution, constant reassurance, perpetual harmony. Mature love understands that sometimes love means sitting in the hard conversation. Sometimes love means giving space when you want connection. Sometimes love means waiting while the other person processes. Sometimes love means trusting the relationship can hold conflict without shattering. What emerges from the crucible, if both people stay and do the work, is something neither could have created alone. A bond that has been tested and proven resilient. A love that knows the worst about both people and chooses to stay anyway. A partnership that has integrated shadow and light, disappointment and gratitude, frustration and appreciation. This is the gold the alchemist spoke of, not the base metal of initial attraction, but the refined substance of conscious love. You will look at your partner one day and realize they are more precious to you than they were in the beginning, not despite what you have been through, but because of it. Every conflict that was repaired has deepened trust. Every disappointment that was grieved has increased realism. Every wound that was witnessed has expanded intimacy. You have built something together that cannot be built any other way. And that building is the sacred work God called you to when He brought you together. The practice of perpetual becoming. The crucible does not end. This is what most people do not understand. They believe that once they have worked through the initial challenges, once they have learned each other's patterns and developed better communication, the relationship will stabilize into comfortable companionship. And while there are seasons of ease, the fundamental truth remains. Sacred partnership is not a static achievement, but a dynamic practice that requires continuous attention, intention, and renewal. You are both always changing. The person you committed to 5 years ago is not the same person sitting across from you now. They have been shaped by experiences you did not share, by losses that marked them, by growth that shifted their perspective. You are not the same person either. And the relationship must evolve to accommodate these changes, or it will calcify into a form that no longer fits either of you. This is where many long-term relationships fail, not from lack of love, but from lack of adaptation. The practice of perpetual becoming requires you to stay curious about your partner even after you think you know them completely. To ask questions not because you need information, but because you genuinely want to understand how they are experiencing their life right now. To notice the subtle shifts in their energy, their interests, their struggles. To make space for them to become someone slightly different than they were without feeling threatened by that evolution. This is particularly challenging when their growth moves in a direction that is inconvenient for you. Perhaps they discover a calling that requires time you are accustomed to having. Perhaps they develop an interest you do not share. Perhaps they realize they need something from the relationship they were not asking for before. Your first instinct may be to resist, to try to preserve the arrangement you had found comfortable. But sacred love asks you to release your grip on who they were and welcome who they are becoming, even when that becoming disrupts your equilibrium. The same is true for your own evolution. You cannot sacrifice your growth to maintain relationship harmony. That is not love. It is self-abandonment. Your partner needs you to keep developing, keep pursuing your calling, keep becoming more fully yourself. Not in selfish disregard for their needs, but in healthy recognition that you are still an individual with your own sacred path. Sometimes your growth will be difficult for them. You must learn to hold their discomfort with compassion while still honoring what your soul requires. This is the paradox of mature partnership. You must be committed enough to weather difficulty together, yet individuated enough to maintain your separate wholeness. Too much fusion and you lose yourself. Too much independence and you lose the relationship. The work is finding the dynamic balance point that allows for both deep connection and individual authenticity. And that balance point is always shifting, always requiring recalibration. One of the most important practices is maintaining a shared spiritual foundation. This does not mean you must have identical beliefs or practices, but it does mean you need some form of transcendent reference point beyond your own desires and conflicts. When you are stuck in an argument about something trivial, the spiritual foundation reminds you this is not actually about the dishes or the schedule. It is about fear or control or wounded pride. When you are tired of doing the work, the spiritual foundation reminds you this partnership is not just for your mutual comfort, but for your mutual sanctification. Prayer together, even if uncomfortable at first, becomes a powerful tool for staying aligned. Not prayer that asks God to change your partner into what you want them to be, but prayer that asks God to change you into someone capable of loving them better. Prayer that thanks God for what this person is teaching you. Prayer that asks for help seeing them through divine eyes rather than your own limited perception. These prayers soften you, humble you, return you to what matters. Gratitude practice is equally essential, not once in a while, but as a daily discipline. Every night before sleep, identify 3 specific things you appreciate about your partner. Not grand things necessarily. Maybe the way they made coffee this morning. Maybe the patience they showed when you were irritable. Maybe the quiet stability of their presence. This practice trains your attention to notice what is good rather than fixating on what is lacking. And what you pay attention to grows. Repair practice is another non-negotiable. You will hurt each other. Not occasionally, but regularly. Because you are human and imperfect and learning. The question is not whether harm will happen, but whether you will repair it. Repair does not mean the person who was hurt must immediately forgive and move on. It means the person who caused harm must acknowledge it, take responsibility for it, express genuine remorse, and demonstrate through changed behavior that they understand the impact. And the person who was hurt must be willing to receive that repair, to let the offense go rather than storing it for future ammunition. Most relationships fail not because of the conflicts themselves, but because of failed repairs. One person offers a half-hearted apology. The other dismisses the hurt as oversensitivity. Neither takes full ownership. The wound goes underground, unresolved, and adds to the accumulation of resentments that eventually kill connection. But when both people are committed to repair, when they can say, "I was wrong, and I hurt you, and I want to do better," and mean it, The relationship develops an immune system that can handle the inevitable injuries of long-term intimacy. There must also be practice of celebration, not waiting for major milestones, but marking the small victories. They faced something difficult and did it anyway. You had a hard conversation and both stayed present. You experienced a moment of genuine joy together. These moments deserve acknowledgement, ritual, honoring. Perhaps you have a weekly practice of sharing one highlight from the week. Perhaps you create small traditions around ordinary events. Perhaps you simply pause to name the goodness when you notice it. This practice builds a reservoir of positive connection that you can draw from during the inevitable dry seasons. The practice of perpetual becoming also requires periodic retreat, not from each other, but together, away from the demands and distractions of regular life. Time set aside to remember why you chose this, to reconnect beneath the surface of logistics and responsibilities, to dream together about what you are building. Without this retreat, the relationship becomes purely functional. Two people coordinating schedules, but forgetting they are also companions on a sacred journey. Finally, there must be practice of letting go. Letting go of how you thought it would be. Letting go of the fantasy partner who does not exist. Letting go of the scorekeeping about who has sacrificed more. Letting go of the need to be right. Letting go of old hurts that have been repaired. Letting go of the version of your partner from 5 years ago so you can see who they are now. This ongoing letting go creates space for what is actually present, rather than cluttering the relationship with ghosts of past disappointments and unmet expectations. An elderly couple was asked about the secret to their 60-year marriage. The husband said simply, "We just kept showing up." The wife added, "We showed up even when we did not want to, even when it was hard, even when we were tired of each other. We showed up, and we did the next right thing. And somehow, that was enough." This is the unsexy truth about sacred partnership. It is not sustained by passion or compatibility, or even love as a feeling. It is sustained by commitment, enacted day after day through small practices of attention and care. You brush your teeth. You drink water. You exercise. Not because any single instance transforms you, but because the accumulation of small practices over time creates health. Relationship is no different. The small practices accumulate. And what is built through that accumulation cannot be built any other way. Your soulmate is not your reward. They are your sacred assignment. God did not bring you together to make your life easier. He brought you together to make your soul larger. Large enough to hold disappointment and gratitude simultaneously. Large enough to love imperfectly and forgive repeatedly. Large enough to see the divine image in another person, even when they are being frustratingly human. This enlargement is the point. This is what prepares you for eternal love. So practice. Keep practicing. When you want to withdraw, practice staying. When you want to criticize, practice appreciation. When you want to be right, practice being curious. When you want to protect yourself, practice vulnerability. When you want to give up, practice showing up one more time. The practices are simple. The execution is difficult. But this is the narrow path that leads to the expansive love you have always wanted. And you walk it together, two imperfect people helping each other home,